Episode 2, Shadows of the Old Library. The old library stood at the edge of the city, encircled by gnarled oaks whose branches, like skeletal fingers, scratched at its time-darkened walls. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged leather bindings, rotting wood, and a faint sweetness, like the breath of long-forgotten eras. This place was more than a repository of books, it breathed. A living entity guarding secrets not meant for the human mind. The shelves, carved from dark oak, stretched toward the high ceiling, their edges adorned with intricate carvings resembling ancient runes, barely discernible beneath layers of dust. Each book on those shelves felt like part of the library's organism, their faded, brittle pages held not just words, but something greater echoes of those who wrote, read, or hid them. Light filtered weakly through tall, arched windows, diffused and hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the sanctity of the place. Heavy velvet curtains steeped in centuries of dust hung in folds like frozen waves. Sun rays piercing through them cast a mosaic of light and shadow on the floor, shifting as if following an unseen rhythm. Dust motes danced in the air, creating the illusion that time here had frozen. Yet not died, it flowed slowly, viscous like resin, enveloping everything in its grip. James, the librarian with tired eyes and a habit of fidgeting with his sleeve, felt like an outsider in this place, despite years of working here. His footsteps on the creaking floorboards echoed, the sound returning with a delay, as if someone mimicked them in distant corridors. The library's silence was deceptive. It didn't soothe but strained, like a taut string ready to snap at the slightest touch. Every sound, the rustle of a page, the groan of a shelf, even his own breathing felt like part of an unseen dialogue with the place. At times, he imagined the books whispering to each other, their leather bindings creaking as if exchanging secrets he wasn't meant to know. The library was a labyrinth. Narrow passages between shelves twisted deeper, where light barely reached and the air grew heavier, laced with the scent of mold and iron. In the far corners, where James seldom ventured, stood cabinets with locked glass doors, behind which books bore titles he couldn't decipher. The letters on their spines seemed either worn away or written in a language he didn't recognize. These corners frightened him most. The shadows there were thicker, and sometimes he swore they moved when he looked away. The beginning of oddities. It started with the disappearance of books. At first, it seemed trivial. A couple of volumes James remembered seeing on the shelves vanished without a trace. He blamed it on careless visitors or his own exhaustion. The library was vast, and he couldn't always check every corner. But soon, the disappearances became regular. Books didn't just vanish from the shelves, they vanished from reality itself. The ledger showed no record of them, as if they'd never existed. The empty spots on the shelves looked unnatural, like wounds the library tried to conceal but couldn't. One morning, while inspecting a shelf in the western wing, James noticed a book in a black binding with gold. Lettering had disappeared, a book he'd seen just a week ago. It had been on the top shelf, too high for anyone to take casually. He remembered its title, De Umbris Silentium, something about shadows and silence. Now, an empty space gaped in its place, the surrounding dust undisturbed, as if the book had been removed not by hands but by something else. James ran a finger along the shelf's edge and shuddered. The wood was cold, almost icy, despite the warmth of the library. From that day, he became more vigilant. Each morning he walked the shelves, checking for more absences. Books vanished without pattern one day, an ancient alchemical tome, the next a mundane collection of 19th century poetry. But they all left behind the same feeling, a void larger than the missing book itself. It was a void that watched him, waiting for his reaction. Footsteps in the night. At night, the library transformed. When the last visitors left and the city lights outside dimmed, it became something else, more alive, more dangerous. James often stayed late, sorting catalogs or reviewing records. In those hours, the silence turned absolute. But new sounds emerged, sounds that shouldn't have been. At first, it was faint rustling like fingers brushing over book spines. Then he began to hear footsteps. They were light, barely audible, but distinct. The footsteps didn't approach or recede, they simply were, as if someone circled the far end of the hall. James would freeze, listening, but the moment he moved, the sound stopped, dissolving into silence. One night, he decided to investigate. Taking a lantern, he walked down the corridor to the distant shelves, where the footsteps seemed to originate. No one was there, but the air was colder than in the rest of the library, and it smelled not of dust but of something metallic, like rust. That same night, he heard a whisper for the first time. It was his name, James, spoken so softly he thought he'd imagined it. But the whisper came again, closer now, as if someone stood right behind him. He spun around but saw only shadows gliding across the shelves. The lantern in his hand trembled, its light dancing, illuminating book spines that seemed to stare back at him. The book that waited. A week later, the disappearances turned menacing. James noticed books vanishing, not just from open shelves but from locked cabinets, the keys to which only he held. He began to suspect someone was breaking in at night. But the locks were untouched, the windows secure. He decided to check the ledger, an old, worn record book where all books were logged. Flipping through its pages, he found that entries for the missing books had vanished, as if erased by an invisible hand. It was impossible he kept the ledger himself, and no one else had access. That same day, acting on a strange impulse, James approached a cabinet in the library's farthest corner. Behind the glass door was a book he hadn't noticed before. Its binding was dark blue, almost black, with an embossed pattern resembling a spiderweb. There was no title, only a faint symbol, a circle with a cross inside. He opened the cabinet, and his fingers, brushing the book, felt a chill, as if it were carved from ice. James brought the book to his desk and opened it. The first page was blank, but the air around him thickened, as if someone breathed down his neck. He turned the page and froze. Words were written there by hand, the ink fresh despite the paper's age. A murder that will change everything. This wasn't part of the book, it was a message meant for him. He read on, each line searing into his mind. The book told of Francis Haley, a scholar and bibliophile murdered in this library in 1873. His death was officially ruled an accidenta, fall from a ladder in the western wing. But the book revealed the truth: Haley had been killed because he'd come too close to unraveling the library's secret. He sought the very books, now disappearing texts, that held knowledge capable of rewriting history. These books weren't mere texts, but artifacts, sealed with spells to keep them from prying eyes. Haley had found one and begun decoding it. He wrote in his diary excerpts of which were included in this book that the library was alive and didn't want its secrets revealed. His notes ended with a description of a ritual he planned to perform to awaken the library. The next night he was dead, and his diary vanished along with the book he'd been studying. The curse of knowledge. James closed the book, but its words echoed in his mind. He felt the library watching him, not the walls, not the shelves, but the very space infused with something ancient and hungry. His hands shook, and a coldness grew in his chest, unexplainable by any draft. He realized he'd become part of this mystery, with no way back. The next day, another book disappeared. But now James noticed a pattern: all the missing volumes dealt with occultism, alchemy, or ancient languages. He began searching the catalog for mentions of Haley, and found an old report hidden in a box of unsorted papers. It stated that after Haley's death, the library was closed for a year, and some of its collections were lost in a fire. But James knew there had been no fire had seen repair records that mentioned nothing of the sort. At night, the footsteps grew louder. Now they didn't just echo in the distance, they approached, stopping at the door of the reading room where James worked. He lit a lamp, but the light didn't dispel the darkness, it thickened it, as if the shadows resisted. The whispers of his name became clearer, and one night he made out a phrase, "You're too close." The voice was low, rasping, as if it came from beneath the earth. The investigation begins. James knew he couldn't ignore what was happening. He began compiling a list of the missing books, searching for connections between them. Some were mentioned in Haley's notes as keys to the gates. He recalled a storage room in the library's basement, a place he'd never entered. Behind an iron door covered in rust, its key held by the director, whom James hadn't seen in months. Each day, he noticed new details. Books he'd checked in the morning were found upside down, or open to specific pages by evening. One day, he found a sheet of paper on his desk, with the same symbol, a circle with a cross drawn on it. The paper was old, but the ink fresh, as if someone had left it moments ago. The library grew increasingly hostile. The lamps flickered, though the wiring was sound. Shelves creaked even when no one passed by. One night, as James stayed late, he saw a shadow, not his own, but someone else's, glide across the wall and vanish behind a cabinet. He rushed over but found only emptiness, and the smell of rust that now followed him everywhere. James realized the library wasn't just hiding secrets, it was guarding them. And he had become a threat to that order. The missing books, the footsteps, the whispers, Haley's records, all were pieces of a puzzle he had to solve. But with each step, he felt something ancient and powerful stirring, watching him from the shadows. He knew the investigation was only beginning, and the price of truth might be more than he was willing to pay.